so we're going to finish up with this last example of computing your GPA, and then we'll move on and talk about 3, 4, 3, 5. Or we might do some. No, I can't read my notes, so. Okay, but these ones we're going to do just the same exact way that we did the other ones when it's a weighted mean, you've got a frequency distribution. You're going to put things into L1 and L2. And L1 is always going to be the things that you're trying to take the average of. So in this case, if you're doing your grade point average, you're finding the average of the grade points. So you're looking here at your grades. You can't really put in A, B, C, D and take the average of those things. So what they're going to do instead is change it into a grade point. That way you can take average of a number. So we'll do grade point averages on the homework. On a quiz or test, it should tell you what corresponds with each letter. But you've got an A, that's a 4, and a B is a 3, a C is a 2, a D is a 1, and then an F is a 0, but they don't have any F's right here. But those are going to be the things that you want to put in L1. That's what you're taking the average of. So you're going to put your grade points in L1, and then in L2 you're going to put how many credits each of them are. That's going to be your weight or your frequency. So not all of these classes are going to be weighted the exact same. Here you've got history of music, that's 5 credits. It's a lot more than beginning voice, which is only 1 credit. So you don't want to just take the average of these because it's going to give you the wrong answer. So when I gave this test last time, a lot of people missed this problem because I had one like this on the test. They went through and they put in this in L1, this in L2, and then they forgot to, when they run their 1-bar stats, to include both the L1 and the L2. Okay. Stat edit. In L1, I'm putting my grades, which is the 4, the 3, the 2, and the 1 from the letters, just converting them into grade points rather than letter grades. And then in L2, I want to be sure to put in my credits, because otherwise it's going to be wrong. 1, 4, 3, and 5. So now to calculate my average, I'll go to Stat, Calc, 1-bar stats, but don't just do 1-bar stats and that's it, because all it'll do is look at L1. You want it to look at L1, but you also want to take into consideration these numbers that you put in L2. So with this one, remember in this section, it's always going to be L1, comma, L2. If you have a newer one, just make sure your list is L1 and your frequency list is L2. And then we get back our X bar of 2.08. And if you just did the 1-bar stats program and you forgot to put the L2, it would have come out to 2.5. So you can see this GPA is a little bit less than that, and that's because of how this is structured. See, she's got a D in history of music. That's the class with the most credit, so that D kind of brings it down quite a bit because this 5 is so big. So just take that into consideration. Just remember, when you do these ones, you have to do L1, comma L2 in your calculator. So the first one that comes up is one that only gives you 1 chance. I think maybe you get 2 chances. Just be sure when you do this with the class midpoint, you use just the lower class limits. So for this one, you've got your first class is 0 to 4, and your second class is 5 to 9. To get the midpoint, you need to take the average of what 2 numbers? The what?
0 and 5.
0 and 5. You want to be sure you use the lower class limits, so use the 0, use the to 5. Don't use any of the upper class limits. I had somebody miss that in another class. So just be sure when you do this first one, you only get a couple tries on it. So don't use the upper class limits, only use the lower class limits. We do this one, so I really didn't like it all that much. So notice on these ones they say sample mean and sample standard deviation. Whenever they say sample standard deviation, just use the S and not the sigma in your calculator. Here for number 4, they give you people who are covered by health insurance. They give you age, and they give you the number in millions. So that's, since it's millions, that's going to be everybody 25 to 64 years. It's millions of people. They also give you these ones here, mu and sigma, to let you know that it is a population. For that one, you don't have to really try to figure it out. They ask you specifically for sigma. So when you do this one, since it says sigma, just be sure to look for the sigma and not the S. I don't think you can actually do S on this one because you're going to have decimals. Let's go ahead and do this one. Okay, so for number 4 on the homework, so the first thing we need to do is figure out what the midpoints are, because they don't tell us that. So to find the average, when we're estimating the average for these, I know it's been since Wednesday, but you need to know what the midpoint is for each of these. So if you have the first class, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, just write that again. Okay, so now to get our midpoint for this one, we're going to take just the averages of these numbers. We're not using any of the upper class limits. So for the midpoint for this one, we'll do 25 plus 35 over 2, and that's going to give us 30. That adds up to 60. So if we do 35 plus 45 over 2, that should give you 40. And again, if you want to just notice the pattern, it's just increasing by 10s because 10 is our class width. We're just adding 10 to each time. So here's going to be our midpoints. So those values are going to go into what column in our calculator?
L1?
Yeah, those are going to go in L1. And then what goes in L2?
Midpoint.
The number of what? Oh, in millions. That's right. Okay, sorry. I heard number. I didn't know which one to say. Here we've got L2. That's the number of people in millions. That's going to be our frequency. So this is the same thing as our frequency, L2. And this is our L1. You can just put them in as decimals. That's what I'm going to do when you run this program. So. So L1, I'm going to put all my midpoints. When you're doing this on a test, there's not a good way for you to show your work because your calculator does most of it. So the way you would show your work on this one is just to say, my midpoints are these, and actually write down what you put down in your L1, and then say, in my L2, I put my frequencies, and that's how you can show your work.
Where did you get the 60 midpoint from? What numbers did you add together?
For the 60, all I did really was just adding 10 each time for these. But if you weren't using that process and you get here, you don't want to use the 64 because that's an upper class limit. So hypothetically speaking, if there were another class down here, it would start at 65. So if you do 55 plus 65 divided by 2, then you'll get 60.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so now we need to find the average of these things. So we'll go to Stat, Calc, 1-bar stats. I don't want to do just that though, because then it will just look at L1 and it won't use my L2 that I put in. So I want to be sure I do L1, comma, L2, enter. And so now when I do that for number 4, you can see my X bar is 45.94. My sigma is 10.25. They don't give me an S, and that's just because I've got decimals here in my L2 and it confuses it. So if that's the case, if you go through and do it, this type of problem, and they don't give you an S, well then you can't use S, and then it's just going to be sigma. You don't have to worry about having that blank. So in this case, they know just from the numbers you put in that it has to be a population. So that's why they give you the sigma, and you don't have an S up for that one. So most of the other ones, though, will be S's because they'll be sample standard deviations.